Hi everyone, welcome to Aisha's Corner. This is Aisha speaking. Today I'll be having a conversation with Faizan, who is a second year medical student in America. So can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a second year med student in a U.S. medical school at the University of Louisville, and I'm about to actually end my second year. We're about to begin studying for the board exam, so I only have about 3 weeks left of actually my second year of med school. And so one of my mentors is actually a professor on the admissions of my medical school, and
Mhm.
so I have a lot of information on what they're looking for nowadays from an actual direct person who is on the committee. And then apart from that, I do MCAT tutoring and help pre-meds write their essays and whatnot. So I'm really passionate about that as well.
Right, and you do have an Instagram profile, so you do a bit of like social media stuff. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So my Instagram is Medic Tribe, and then I also have a TikTok, which is also Medic Tribe. So I post videos on there, and it's basically I just try to post MCAT tips and just videos on helping med students, and then I also have a Facebook group also called
Mhm.
Medic Tribe where I post where people can just interact with me or they can post questions, and kind of it builds like a networking community with other pre-meds and other doctors who are in the group. And I think the Facebook group has 1,000 people, so if I don't know the answer to something, chances are one of the other 1,000 people do.
Right. And are you partnering with a student from UK? Because I know I saw on your profile there was another person's name.
Yeah. So he originally we had a joint profile for Medic Tribe, but we figured it would be better if there was just a UK version and then the
Hmm.
USA version because
Right.
there's two different exams and the process is a
Yeah.
little different. So it would be confusing having both on one profile.
Okay, that makes sense. So we'll just get right into it. I want to start with high school because a lot of there's not much information out there for high school students, right? So what is one piece of advice that you have for high school students that are interested in medicine, and what can they do to really prepare for maybe undergrad or medical school admissions?
So, from a high school perspective, I think the biggest is getting into college. I think in US actually, you can shadow as a high schooler, but the only problem is you're not really going to know much about what you're actually seeing just because your knowledge of science is going to be so limited. But it
Right.
does expose you to the medical field, and you can get an idea if you're going to like working with sick patients or not. So I think
Hmm.
shadowing is one of the biggest things you can do even as a high schooler, is just asking a doctor if you can follow them around. Or I know in high school I volunteered at a hospital
Right.
and just help with like cleaning up the beds and whatnot, and I got to kind of get an idea of the medical atmosphere that way.
Hmm.
And just
Yeah.
taking science classes, I think my high school offered anatomy and physiology. I took that. I took biology. So I
Yeah.
got an introduction into the sciences of medicine and I really liked it. So that was kind of what prospered me to do it in undergrad and not medical school.
No, I agree with that. I feel like with high school, you need to really have a strong foundational concept of science and math, just focus on those classes. And in Canada, you can't really shadow, but I also volunteered at the hospital, so you can interact with patients. So just getting a sense of whether you like that or not, it's really important. Okay, so let's say you're in university now, it's first year, and you're kind of having trouble keeping up with everything. The pace is different from high school. So, what is one piece of advice that you have for maintaining good grades in undergrad? Because I know that's a very important component in medical school admissions.
Yeah, so I think with undergrad, my biggest thing was time management. I think that's like the one skill if I could teach someone is time management.
Yeah.
Um, the reason why is because I think another thing a lot of pre-meds do their first year especially is they overcommit. They want to do
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah.
And so I limited my extracurriculars to maybe three or four things, max four.
Hmm.
And so I just focus on a select few things and then, got leadership positions in those. And I recommend having like an agenda or buying an agenda and then writing out what you're going to do each day and maybe the times of what you want to do those things. So I
Hmm.
think organization and limiting your involvement is very key.
Yeah, you're actually right. I experienced that too when I started. I wanted to do so many different things. I had a job. And then the first semester, I was like, I have to drop something because you can't just do everything at once. And so pick one or two things. And I think I agree, like if you start early, you're able to get leadership positions in your third and fourth year. So do start early, but
Exactly.
don't overexert yourself, which I definitely agree. Okay, so a lot of people do research or a lot of people do shadowing because they think that that's what medical schools require. So, in your experience, what kind of activities do you think, I guess, not look good, but they are effective for medical school applications?
For undergrad, I think like the golden triad is what I call it, is shadowing, which I know you can't do in Canada, but at least in US, shadowing is like the unsaid requirement.
Yeah.
Um, Shadowing, volunteering, and research isn't necessary, but it does look good. I encourage some sort of research.
Hmm.
So I think those three, but actually the best activity in my opinion, and this is a very cliche answer, so I'll back this up with
Yeah.
evidence, but is the activity that you're passionate about. Let me
Mm.
explain what that means. In my interview, we at my interview for the first 20 of the 30 minutes, we didn't talk about anything medicine related.
Okay.
Um, my interviewer asked me, his first question was, "What sort of things do you like to do in your free time?"
Mm.
And I actually told him I recently just went on a hiking trip with my friends to like the Rocky Mountains, and I said that was really fun. And I told him I'm really into boxing and I have this boxing license from the United States, and so I like boxing and competing in that too. And for the
Right.
next, and it turned out my interviewer was a huge like nature fanatic, and
Oh,
he
wow.
loved running and hiking. So for the first 20 to 30 minutes, we talked about like what sort of workouts he did versus what I did, why he did. Like it was just all this fitness themed interview. And then
Right.
he realized in the last 5 minutes of the interview that he forgot to ask me about like medical school. And
Yeah.
so he quickly asked me, "So why do you want to become a doctor?" and all that. So,
Yeah.
and it turned out that this guy was my professor for anatomy my first year. So I saw
Mm.
him again my first day of medical school.
Okay.
And I asked him, I was like, "So what made you give me the medical school acceptance?" And he says that there's a lot of undergrads who apply who have the cookie cutter application,
Hmm.
research, uh, shadowing, volunteering, but he could tell that there's nothing else that they do that
Right.
has like a unique personality to them. And he found that the
Yeah.
whole boxing and hiking thing was very unique. And so
Yeah.
he remembered me way after. So I think the best activity is the one that you're passionate about.
That's actually true. And in your whenever you're passionate about something, it shows through in the interview, in the application. I know that in America you have to write personal statements and all that, and if you're reading like thousands of personal statements that talk about the same thing, you will blend in with other people. So do whatever you're passionate about. In Canada as well, we do have this framework, like I mentioned in my previous videos. It's called CanMed. So you can do any activity as long as you showcase that you learned something from it, or you basically improve your communication skills, teamwork skills. You don't have to do a specific activity. So yeah, that makes sense actually. Okay. So the next component of an application is like an MCAT, right? A lot of people do struggle with getting a high enough score, whether that's in the science section or the car section. And some people do have to take it multiple times. So what advice do you have for getting a good score? And do American schools look down on people that have to retake it multiple times?
So to answer your second question first, unfortunately, there is a little bit of a stigma towards
Mhm.
taking the MCAT multiple times,
Right.
but I actually took it twice, and it's okay to take it twice, but you
Mhm.
have to show improvement on your
Right.
second score. You don't want to take it twice and get the same score, or
Yeah.
worse, get a worse score. And
Mhm.
so, you can, if you take it twice, you can actually use that to your advantage. You can show your interviewer like, "Hey, I didn't know how to study effectively my first time, but as you can see from my score progression, I learned how to study. I was more
Mhm.
mature and I understood these test taking techniques better." So that's what I did. That's the exact lines that I used in my interview when they asked me
Okay.
why I took it twice. Um, in terms of studying for the MCAT, my one thing is the one thing that I wish I did differently was practice questions.
Mhm. Right.
I spend way too much time watching videos, writing notes that I never looked at
Yeah.
again, or just thinking that I would retain information from reading the Kaplan books, which I didn't.
Yeah.
So I wish 80% of my time was spent on just practice questions. And
Hmm.
the analogy that I give is just because you read something doesn't mean you know how to apply something.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
practice questions is my thing. I think you need to start them from day one, like U World and AMC, all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the crazy part is that on the MCAT, the freestanding questions might test your knowledge, but I feel like majority of it is just application based. There's none that directly ask you to recall facts. And I do agree, practice is so crucial. And yeah, so that makes perfect sense. So you recommend UWorld. Are there any other resources that you used on your second time but didn't use on your first time?
So it's funny, all these resources, they weren't available when I took my
Oh, okay.
MCAT. So U World wasn't a thing, Anki wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
None of this stuff was. The way that people used to study in the olden days, I like to call it, is that we would have a review phase and then we'd have a practice phase.
Mm.
We would spend 1 month just reviewing material with no practice questions, and we would spend another month only doing practice questions.
Mhm.
That's what the old strategies used to be
Right.
before UWorld. So now with the introduction of UWorld and Anki, the whole game has changed.
Yeah.
And so um, actually, the way that the Met students study for USMLE is the exact way that people should study for the MCAT,
Mhm.
which is you read a chapter of the Kaplan book, you immediately do the Anki cards, and then
Mm.
you do the U World practice questions on that topic the same day. And
Right.
so
And
I would recommend U World and AMC as two big question packs.
And so you're saying that writing notes, I also had the same exact experience. Writing notes was such a time-consuming activity. It didn't serve me at all. Did you make Anki cards straight away, or how did you read the material?
So I use Anki cards. Once like Anki wasn't a thing for my MCAT, but I can attest to med school. With med school, um, just to give you an idea of the pace of med school, I know one of the big high yield topics for the MCAT is biochemistry, like
Mhm.
metabolism, all that. I know that's an undergraduate course in most schools, metabolism. In med school, we learned all of that in a week, to just give you an idea of the pace of med school.
Right.
And then our test on metabolism was next week. So we were
Okay.
required to know all the reactions and whatever it is in a little bit of time. So no one wasted time writing the reactions
Mm.
on notes because we knew that wasn't going to do us any good. So the way that we did it, I had a pre-made Anki deck.
Mm.
So I used there's like resources for med school, like med school pre-made Anki deck. So I used metabolism pre-made Anki deck. And I just
Mm.
used to go through that every day, and then I would do practice questions every day to actually
Okay.
apply that knowledge. But I didn't waste time writing anything down.
Mm. And do you guys have like textbooks, or is it just lecture notes?
We have lecture notes, and we have the Holy Bible of med school, which is first aid.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I had the same exact experience. I only use Anki as well. When did you take your MCAT again?
Mine, let's see, my MCAT it was 3 years ago.
So 2018.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I remember you said that one of your mentors is actually part of the admissions committee. So what is something that you learned from them that is not like a widely known piece of information?
Something that I learned that a lot of people don't know is that um, people put a lot of emphasis on MCAT and GPA, right?
Hmm.
What most people don't know is that after you get your interview, no one really cares about that.
Okay.
So what happens is in these little meetings that they have, someone will present your application. So they'll be like Faizan Ahmed, MCAT, GPA. Here is what he said in his interview. Here's why I liked him. Here's some bad things about his interview. They'll go to the pros and cons.
Okay.
So about 3 seconds is spent on your MCAT and GPA. The rest of the presentation is about your application, what you wrote, and your personality in your
Mm.
interview. And then
Okay.
there's a vote on the whole committee, and they vote to either reject you, to accept you or to waitlist
Mhm.
you.
And that's
So,
for traditional interviews, because there's different types of interviews, right?
right. So I'm talking about the one-on-one interviews, which is the
Mhm.
traditional interviews. So a lot of people don't realize how important your personal statement is, or how important your essays are, or how important your personality is in your interview,
Mhm.
because that is actually what sells you in
Right.
those little meetings.
Yeah. And for your school, was it how many stations did you have for the interview?
We do two 30-minute interviews.
Okay, so just two people.
Yeah, one-on-one, two 30-minute
Mhm.
interviews.
Okay, that's good. And what advice do you have for interviews? Like, I know a lot of people are in Canada, they're doing interviews right now. So, what advice do you have for having a good interview?
I recommend doing practice questions beforehand with someone else.
Mhm.
I think I had one or two mock interviews with an old admissions committee member that I knew, and so he helped me, critique my responses. And I think the biggest thing is being honest and
Mhm.
not lying on your interview. And what I mean by that is a lot of people will lie and be like, I want to go into primary care and do rural
Right.
medicine,
Yeah.
when in reality, nothing on their application supports that statement.
Mhm.
But they'll say stuff like that because they know that the school's mission statement is like
Yeah.
rural medicine, stuff like that. So I would be honest about what you actually want to do and not be afraid, and don't say anything in your interview that isn't justified on your application.
Mhm.
Because the whole I want to do primary care rural medicine is becoming a very overused line, at least in American medical school.
Yeah.
People are catching on to that.
Okay. So be as genuine as possible. And I think people can tell. Like if you are bluffing, it's
Yeah,
obvious because
yeah.
just the way you talk, it'll be evident. And I'm trying to think of questions for the interview. So some people say that when you're answering the interview question, it's important for you to provide personal examples to back up your answer. Do you think it's detrimental if let's say they ask you a hypothetical question and you don't have a personal example to back it up? Do you think that will really hurt your interview performance?
I don't think you need a personal example for all of the interview questions. I think logical answers could be fine too. So like, let me try
Mhm.
to think of an example. Like, um, they can ask you ethical questions. So one
Mhm.
ethical question that I got asked in my interview was like, a patient can't afford a medication, so they ask you to give them a discount. As a doctor, what would you do? And so sometimes you don't
Mhm.
have personal examples or personal things you can relate to giving them an answer. You kind of just have to use logic and reasoning.
Right, yeah.
Personal examples are always necessary.
And it makes sense because I know some students they'll make stuff up just so they have a personal example, but that's
Yeah.
obviously not a good thing to do. Okay, so let's move on to now finally you're admitted to medical school. Now, is medical school what you expected it to be? Like pre-med students have an expectation of how medical school will be like, right?
Yeah.
Did it meet your expectations or like what was your first year experience?
Uh, no, medical school wasn't what I thought it would be. No. So, this isn't meant to scare anyone, but
Yeah.
when people say that medical school is a lot of work and you study all the time, I don't think people people realize like what that actually means. When we say
Yeah.
study all the time, we really do mean that some days you wake up and you study the whole day and you
Yeah.
go to sleep. Like I said, the whole metabolism thing was an eye opener to me because it was we spent like I learned a whole under like 4 months worth of undergrad of biochemistry, right?
Wow.
They taught that same amount in 3 or 4 days, and we had our exam the next week, and it's just like a very fast-paced thing, and so it definitely took me a while to understand how to study in medical school and how
Mhm.
to get adapted to the pace of medical school. So
Right.
I definitely wasn't prepared for that.
And what were some things that you did to like really get used to the pace of medical school?
My big thing was professor office hours. So
Mhm.
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little cocky my first few days of medical school. I just got into medical school. I'm super
Right.
young, all that, and the average age of my class, I think it was like 24, 25 for
Mhm.
first year students, and I was like 21. And I
Yeah.
was a little cocky there, and I got humbled by my first exam. I passed by, I remember it was 2 questions.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I went to my professor's office hours, I remember, and I told him, look, I studied so much. Here, look at all my notes. I showed him all my notes detailed, and
Yeah.
I said, I don't know what I did wrong. And they said, you need to stop taking notes, and um, they told me how to study more efficiently. So all I did was I changed my study taking tactics. And
Mhm.
what I did was I stopped doing so much content review and did more practice questions.
Right.
And after I switched content read for practice questions, that's when my scores began to actually increase, and I started learning more material.
Yeah, so it's just knowing how to study. And so do you have any recommendations for resources for first year medical students, like YouTube videos, anything that you use to really get used to the pace?
Yeah, so for first year medical students, my favorite resource is something called Boards and Beyond. So
Mm-hmm.
it's basically like a video series where there's this guy dumbs down all these topics. So he'll teach you glycolysis in 15 minutes. He'll teach you the Krebs cycle in 10 minutes. So all the high yield points of what could be tested on. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
usually 5 practice questions after the video. You can immediately test what you just learned.
Okay.
And so I love those videos, and I'm using those videos right now to study for my board exam. So they're quick 10 to 15-minute videos that all the high yield material is there. And then another big resource is something called Sketchy. So
Mm-hmm.
Sketchy is a cartoon actually. So there are cartoons that you watch, and they go over different types of bacteria and medication. So for example, there's a Sketchy on aspirin, and it's this little cartoon of cartoon characters explaining what aspirin is. And so the whole idea is, if you can imagine this funny cartoon in your head, it can help you answer those questions, because a lot of bacteria and pharmacology in medical school is pure memorization. There's no really
Mm-hmm.
there's no
Okay.
really like physiology. It's just whether you know it or you don't.
It's just facts.
It's
Okay.
just facts, a lot of facts. And so to memorize those facts, they have these cartoons. So
Yeah.
whenever I'm stuck on a question on pharmacology, I think of the cartoon, and I can usually get the answer
Mhm.
that way.
Have you heard of something called like a thought palace? It kind of
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like that, where you imagine a place and then each place is associated with a fact, and you can think of that place and recall that particular fact.
Exactly. It's basically like a thought palace, but you're using cartoons.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so my next question is, what is your favorite part about medical school?
My favorite part is probably you're actually learning things that you will get to use to save someone's life.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is, I was having a random conversation with someone at the grocery store, and they found out I was a med student. I told them I was a medical student. So they told me about this condition that they almost died of when they were a kid. And I actually learned about that condition a few days before in my classes, the whole diagnosis and treatment and what it is. And I told them about it, and they were so impressed. And so that was probably my favorite thing, is that even on those long days of medical school studying, it's reassuring to know that what I'm learning it's actually
Mhm.
practical. So I think that's my favorite thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, personally, for me too, like in high school, to be honest, I'm not really a math person because I know math has applications, but it must be very gratifying to know that you're learning something so applicable to real life.
Right.
So my next question is, what is your least favorite part about medical school?
I think the least favorite part is I just think the general anxiety that a lot of med
Mm,
students have. I think so with the MCAT, I think one of the biggest fears every student has on test day is, what if something shows up on their test that they didn't study? Because
yeah,
it's impossible to know everything for the MCAT, right?
you can't.
And so in medical school, you're never done studying. So even when I'm taking a break, what's going through my mind is, I haven't studied this lecture yet. And even for the exams in medical school, it's just impossible to know everything.
Hmm.
And so it's easy to fall into the trap of studying all day, every day. So you
Yeah.
can memorize every little fact. And so I think just the volume of material is very
Mhm.
overwhelming sometimes because you feel guilty even on your breaks that you should be
Mhm.
studying. And so
Right.
that's something that I still struggle with today.
Okay. And are you like, how are you dealing with that? Or is there any strategy that you're doing or just going with the flow?
Me, I use a strategy called I have dedicated breaks in my day. So for
Mhm.
example, I like working out and going to the gym, so I treat the gym like an exam.
Okay.
No matter, like, if you have an exam tomorrow, it doesn't matter if you're feeling motivated, it doesn't matter if you're feeling sick, you have to take the exam. Your professor
Yeah.
isn't going to let you skip the exam just because you're not in the mood.
Mhm.
And so I treat my gym time like that is like I treat it like I have a class from 8 to 9 in the morning and I have to go. So I
Right.
treat my gym like that. I have to go no matter what. So it's like a forced break in my mind.
Mhm.
So I kind of
Yeah.
trick my mind into having mandatory fun breaks.
Mhm. Okay. So I know that a lot of students, like I know I have like medical school friends as well, and they're like, they don't have time for anything. So not even like social relationships or like working out. So I guess like you're saying that you make time for what you want, you know? So and like working out is important, maintaining relationships are important. So what I'm getting from your answer is make like mandatory time for those things because those are important, right?
Right. Like I said, I can relate to your friends. It seems like there's no free time in medical school. So you kind of have to make free time for yourself.
Hmm.
And what you learn is like sometimes when I take the 1 hour break and then I come back to studying, my studying is twice as efficient because I gave
Mm,
my brain time to kind of relax and absorb that information. So sometimes, as weird as it sounds, it helps not studying.
yeah. No, I personally experienced this because like the second time I was taking the MCAT, I was so stressed. I'm like, I need a high score. I'm gonna study 24/7. And then there came a point where I wasn't processing anything. Like even the easiest like passage, it just went right through my head. And I was like, okay, at this point, I think I should take a break. So I took a day off and just hung out with my family, and I think that really helped. And I think medical schools do want a balanced individual that have other interests, that have other passions, because you just don't want a robot, right? As a
Right.
physician. Okay, so, well, I mean, my next question was, is there something you struggled with? And that's obviously the volume and the pacing of medical school, right?
Right.
And next question is, do you need to know what specialty you want to get into once you get into medical school, or do you have time to figure it out?
No, you have time to figure it out. You have a lot of time to figure it out. That's what the whole point of third and fourth year is you do rotations in different specialties.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, you don't need to know.
And are you interested in any particular specialty right now?
Me, yeah, I'm really into cardiology is
Mhm.
what I'm really hopeful for.
Okay. Is there a particular reason or?
Me, I've always been biased towards cardiology. I just always found it very fascinating. And we studied cardiology in medical school, I think in this November to December. And it was my absolute favorite unit of medical school. I really actually enjoyed learning the content. I actually looked
Okay.
forward to the lectures. And so
Yeah.
I could definitely see myself studying that for the rest of my life.
Okay. That's cool. Okay, so now I want to move on to like more miscellaneous questions. So I know you wrote a book called Road to Success, and I know, okay, I'm not sure when you wrote it, but I'm assuming when you were young. So how did you get started on writing a book at such a young age, and like what was the process like?
Yeah, I actually wrote that book my senior year of high school.
Oh wow, okay.
And I think I had a lot so I got accepted into college and I wanted to I was obsessed with like self-improvement and self-development. So I read like a lot of leadership books, business books, books on psychology, on overcoming obstacles and
Mhm.
all this stuff. And eventually I gained so much information and I figured there's no book that I could find that had all this information combined. And so that was my goal. I wanted to kind of take all this information that I found and take the best parts of it and combine my own experiences and put it into a book. And so I found a local publisher who was willing to help edit my book for free. And I would send her 10 pages a time and she would edit it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did what's called self-publishing. So this is when you publish without like when you publish by yourself. And the
Okay.
advantage of this is sometimes it can take $10,000 to actually send your book and pay for
Yeah.
publishing fees for an official company. And
Mm-hmm.
as a high school student, I didn't have the money to
Yeah.
like send it to like an official company. So I use the self-publishing process on a site called lulu.com.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really cool actually. And so you said you're fascinated with self-help. So if you published the book in grade 12, when did you get started in all of this? Like, was it in high school or middle school?
Yeah, so I started reading about all the self-help stuff near senior year,
Mm-hmm.
and I was interested in working out, and uh, that expanded to like learning about college and over how to overcome failures. I became fascinated with that topic. Like, why
Mm-hmm.
are some people successful and why are some people not successful when we all have the same 24 hours in the day?
Mm-hmm.
What are some people doing differently? I became like obsessed with that question. And so
Okay.
I started studying all these people, and that's the whole process. It was a lot of just curiosity, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like like these athletes, like I was, like I mentioned, like working out, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like these bodybuilders, this guy was homeless, but yet now he's a millionaire. So like, what did he do differently?
Mm-hmm.
Like I became obsessed with questions like that.
Okay. So what's the secret formula for success that you learned?
I think the secret formula is it is actually a formula. Like I'm no joke. I gave a speech on
Okay.
this. The formula is E plus R equals O. And
What's
so
that?
let me break that down. So that means E is events, R is response, and then O is outcomes. So I can give you a specific example that I used in my speech. So in the United States, there's a place called California, and there's earthquakes there almost every day. And one day there was a news station. They were doing a news segment on this traffic jam that resulted because of an earthquake. So there's this huge traffic jam, like 6 or 7 in the morning. Everyone's trying to get to work,
Yeah.
and they interviewed this one guy, and this guy said, "I hate living in this state. I'm always late to work, and I hate waiting in my car." And then they interviewed the guy who was directly behind him, and this guy was so happy. He says, "I love California. Even though there's these earthquakes, I sit in my car, I listen to my Spanish audio CD so I can learn a new language, and I read the daily newspaper so I can keep up with current events.
Yeah.
And it forces me to get up early so I can do a morning workout while I'm at it." So it's interesting because the event is the exact same, which is what
Okay.
an
Yeah.
earthquake is. But if you look at the response, one guy hates
Mm-hmm.
it, the other guy is learning a new language, is being politically
Yeah.
informed, and is working out in the morning. And look at the outcome. So I think I try to look whatever happens to me in life, I take the event, but then I respond to it in what I try to do in a
Mhm.
positive way.
Right.
And that so far has led to a lot of positive outcomes.
You're so right. And that's something I was reflecting on like myself this year. And I feel like in life, your life is determined by how you respond to your life events. And like you mentioned about the audiobooks, I was listening to this TED talk, and this person was like, okay, this like what's separating between one person and another is just what they're willing to do with their time. And so this person learned German in a year basically, and he became fluent. Then he went on to do like more things like learn how to fly a plane and all that stuff. And he's like, I don't have any special talents. It's just that I'm willing to put in the hard work that, and every single day I do small steps that kind of lead me towards the goal. And I don't know, I think this kind of reminds me of a book. It's called Atomic Habits. And my friend is reading it right now, but I think she was telling me that the whole thesis of that book is that every day you do small little things that can lead to really big events or big consequences. So yeah, that really makes sense actually. Okay, so I know that you did a TED talk. Was it about the book, or what was your TED talk about?
Right. So my TED Talk was so my senior year of undergrad. I um I came up with the idea of I wanted to do a charity event using something I was passionate about, which was exercise. So how the TED Talk went down was I contacted the CEO of a company I knew in my city where I live, Lexington, and I said, "Would you sponsor me if I wanted to do pull-ups for 8 hours? Would you give me $1 per pull-up that I could do for 8 hours?" And he said, "Sure." And he said, "How many do you think you could do?" And I said the first number that came to my mind, which was 1,000. I actually had no idea. And he said, "Deal." And I said, "In return, I will sponsor your company and I will get the name out if you can just sponsor me for this event." I said, "I will donate the money
Mhm.
to some charitable cause." A few days later, actually, there was an event that happened in New Zealand where a person shot a bunch of people at a mosque.
Mhm.
And when that event happened in New Zealand, that spoke to me, being a Muslim, and I wanted to do something to raise money for the victims of the New Zealand massacre that happened.
Mhm.
And so I began training for this pull-ups thing. And so I remember I went to the gym my first day. I wanted to see how many pull-ups I could do in 1 hour, and then multiply that number by 8 to get like a baseline.
Mhm.
And I'm not even kidding, I did 30 my first hour. And I freaked out a little bit, but once again, E plus R equals O, right? So I joined a boxing gym and I asked the trainer, I was like, "Hey, I have this goal. Can you train me?" And in the process, I got my USA boxing license because I ended up training with these professionals. I did their workouts, and I did, like you said, atomic habits, 10 to 15 pull-ups every morning. That went
Mhm.
to 20 to 30. Then it went from 30 to 50. Eventually, I was doing hundreds to 200s a day.
Mhm.
And then I think but the actual event when it happened, I was being filmed and there were people counting, official counters for my pull-ups. I did 1,200 that day. So I surpassed my 1,000 goals. So that was what the TED Talk
That's
was about,
amazing.
was that pull-ups and all that.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, and that really ties in with your other idea that because you were able to practice every single day, you actually surpassed your goal, right?
Right.
Okay, so my next question, so I guess atomic habits and all that, that kind of requires that motivation that comes from within. How do you cultivate that? Because I know there are times where you just don't want to do anything and just lie in bed. So how do you cultivate motivation?
Right. So I think I might get a little bit of hate on this, but I think I think people are asking the wrong question. I think we don't need to cultivate motivation. And the
Mhm.
reason why is because I think motivation is an emotion. And emotions are come and go.
Mhm.
For example, I can watch a motivational video. I'll be motivated for the next 10 minutes, but after
Mhm.
that 10 minutes, I'm going to go back to my normal state.
Yeah.
So I think the better question is, how do we cultivate discipline?
Mm.
The way that I describe discipline is motivation is when you go to the gym when it's nice and sunny outside.
Mhm.
Discipline is when you go to the gym when it's raining and snowing.
Yeah.
And so and the way to do discipline is everyone has their different ways, but I think it's atomic habits, which is starting small. So if we're on the topic of studying, I don't think anyone should start off day one of MCAT studying with 10 hours. I think
Mhm.
I think your first day should be 2 hours max.
Yeah.
Then your next day should be 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Mhm.
The next day should be 3 hours. And then in order to get the motivation, I think you need to schedule it. So I'm gonna wake up at 8. I'm gonna have I'm gonna watch a Netflix episode from 8 to 9. I'm gonna have breakfast from 9 to 9:30, and then I'm gonna study from 9 to 12.
Mhm.
And I think if you schedule that and start small, that's how you build discipline.
Right. Oh, that makes sense. So start small and perhaps even have an accountability partner. So like tell a friend that you're doing this, and if you don't do it, to like, just keep you like on check of your goals basically. And so, okay, I just want to, so you said that discipline is something that needs to be cultivated, motivation is more fleeting.
Exactly.
And I think for me also, I guess motivation, I guess you are right, it is fleeting, but always remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing. And there are things that I'm really passionate about, but there's other things like I'm currently taking an English class, and I'm not really passionate about that. So I've been ignoring that and doing everything else. I've been focusing on YouTube. I'm focusing on content creation. And I think because I truly do enjoy all this. And so same thing with medicine. If you're going into medicine, remind yourself why you're doing that. And for me, I used to listen to podcasts. I don't know if you know that podcast, The Undifferentiated Medical Student, where they interview different physicians and then talk about their whatever, how they got to where they are. And that motivated me or reminded me like, okay, I want to be like these people. So yeah, so I guess that's how I try to maintain that motivation, I guess. And okay, so I'm not sure why I wrote this question. Maybe it's because I listened to it in your TED Talk, but I wrote, how do you use pain to your advantage? I don't know why I wrote that, but
Right. So that was what my TED Talk was about, right? So
okay.
um I talk about pain and how it can be one of the greatest gifts, right? So in my personal statement, I had an exact quote that my interviewers loved. And the quote was, "One of the greatest blessings in life is when you reach rock bottom."
Mm,
And what I mean by that is that pain can be one of the best tools of motivation and energy in I think in anyone's life.
mhm,
And you talk about the why, and for me, studying for the MCAT, a big portion of it was like I went to visit my grandfather and he passed away the
mhm,
day after I visited him. No one knew any signs, but the day after he had a stroke and he passed away. And it was one of the, it affected me really deeply. And um, that was the big source of pain in my life. But I fueled that pain and I thought
mhm.
about it, and it really fueled me for studying, and it still does to this day.
Right.
So, and my big thing for the TED Talk was I talked about how a lot of people in society, we try to repress pain. We don't want to think about negative thoughts that may have happened to us in our past. But I kind of advocated for the exact opposite in my TED Talk. I said, you have these things that have happened in your past, use them to your advantage now. It's free fuel, it's free fire
Mhm, yeah.
to accomplish.
Mhm. And that pain could also be rejection, whether that's from a medical school or whether that's a relationship rejection, whatever it is, to use that fire. And something else came to my mind about, pain, and it just, yeah, I forgot. But I guess the last question I have is, how do you cultivate gratitude when you think nothing's going well in your life?
Right, that's a good question. That's something that a lot of med students struggle with. I have a gratitude journal actually. Every morning I wake up and I write down three things I'm grateful for. It takes me about like 30 seconds to do.
Yeah.
And some days it's literally as simple as I'm grateful for having water to drink. I'm grateful for my Wi-Fi working today.
Yeah.
Something, even if they're silly, and really minuscule, I write down three things that I'm grateful for. And so I think that's what I do. I think it's like a conscious reminder of what you're grateful for. And if you write
Mhm.
it down, it really reaffirms it.
Yeah, and I've heard something like don't look above, look below. So look at people who are not as privileged as you to really cultivate that. Do you journal about other things or you just keep a gratitude journal?
Yeah, so might sound a little cheesy. When I was an undergrad, I got waitlisted to the medical school my number one medical school that I wanted to go to. I got
Yeah.
waitlisted. So in my journal, I used to write down what I was grateful for, those three things. And then 10 times I wrote down, I will get accepted into the University of Louisville Medical School. I used to write down that 10 days. And what's funny is I interned my last semester of college at the place that was right next to the medical school. And so I used to, when on my lunch breaks, I would go outside and I would literally, there's this dining area outside right next to the medical school. So I would sit there and I would just look at the medical school sign and I would say, I will get into the University of Louisville Medical School. So I'd bring my
Yeah.
journal and I would journal that 10 times every day. So I
Wow.
did that 4 months and I still keep that journal with me. It's in my backpack and I have it in my backpack as a reminder of, the pain that I went through at one point and how
Yeah.
persistent I was. And
Yeah.
I looked at it and I would write the same 10 things every day,
Wait, so every single day you wrote, I will get into the school 10 times
10
for
times.
4 months.
And you want to know what's weird? You're going to laugh at me. I found a copy of their acceptance letter, a
Yeah.
sample acceptance letter.
Okay.
I printed it and then I wrote my name and I posted it on my wall.
Okay.
And so every morning I would read my acceptance letter.
Okay, so that kind of sounds like manifesting. I don't know, there's this thing going on nowadays. I don't really believe in it, but you basically manifest things in your life. Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, I don't know if it, how whether it works or not works. It's like a supernatural thing, but it was a
Yeah.
confidence booster to me.
Hmm.
It provided me a lot of confidence and optimism because
Yeah.
everyone else around me was getting accepted into medical school. All my friends were,
Hmm.
and I felt, behind. And I promised myself that I would get into it, so I wanted to write it into existence.
Yeah.
And I mean, everything happened the way that it did. I got the same exact acceptance letter, and I framed it next to my fake acceptance letter.
That's nice. But yeah, I have the same belief. I think everything happens for the same reason. And yeah, so I also got waitlisted, and yeah, it's the worst feeling ever when you see everyone else getting in. You're like, what do they have that I don't have? But I think like in the grand scheme of things, and that's my belief that everything happens for a reason. And some people might, I think a lot of people are cynical and they're like, no, there's certain things that don't happen for a reason. But I think, again, like you said, life is all about how you basically experience things and how you view them. And I think that sets apart successful people from unsuccessful ones, right?
Exactly. And it was a motivation thing to me too, to
Okay.
answer your question. I did the same thing with the pull-ups. I would write down, I'm going to do this many pull-ups on the real day, and
Yeah.
I surpassed it. And so it's I think it builds discipline and motivation. If you write it down and believe in it, I think you will do it.
Yeah, I know. And that's something I actually learned in my first year of undergrad. I thought that getting like an A+ was so hard. Like I was like, I wasn't even aiming that high. And obviously I didn't get it because I wasn't aiming for it, right? And then the second year, I'm like, why don't I just aim higher? And like it was so shocking to me that those grades, those really good grades are attainable if you think that you could do it. Like because I think it's like a feedback loop. Like if you think that's possible, you'll do actions that will help you get to that goal rather than not believing in it. But yeah, so I guess that's all the questions I have for you today. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to have this conversation with me. Follow me on Instagram and follow him. What's your handle again?
Yeah, I'll leave it. My the for pre-med it's Medic Tribe. And
Mhm.
my personal one is Slim Fazy.
Okay, and mine is Aisha as underscore corner. I hope you all like this video. Please do give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment below if you have any questions. So thank you so much for watching.